Te mea tūtahi tēnei te mihi kia kōrua. Na mana whenua tēnei rohe, tēnei te mihi kia rātou, kia kaha ta kaupapa o Ngāti Whātua o Rākei. Tēnei te mihi kia koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou mō tō whakaro pai kia mātuku tatu mai tēnei, i tēnei wānanga. I just wanted to quickly respond to Edu's warm welcome to us and also wish the Ngāti Whātua delegation a good trip to Wellington. Well, in the context of Maori development, which is where I do most of my work, and also in the Pacific Islands, one of the interesting aspects of Maori as an indigenous group, globally speaking, is that we are unusual in that most of our tribal assets are export orientated. So every sheep, all the beef, all the trees, everything we own tribally are actually export orientated, which kind of makes us an export orientated tribal system. Whether we like it or not, that's where we are. And so this demands a new way of a tribal system and its tendency to want to think locally, to actually think outside of its tribal boundaries, outside of its localness. And so that's something of the context about this. How do you think locally, rooted in a specific geographic area, when all the assets, all the economic power you have is actually going to go somewhere else in the world? And it just seems to me that's the challenge. So given my background in community development and a previous couple of lives before being an academic, where one has spent all of your life saying local development, do it then, only local communities know what best, and then out of that grows this immense, somehow global or national knowledge. And in recent years, because of what I just mentioned about understanding the Maori economy and its dynamics, and also the Pacific Island economies, because they are small communities that have to export in order to survive, because they are way past sustainable subsistence economies. And so this is going to be one of the great new phenomena of our times, I think, watching these small tribal communities become global players. In global and outlook. Okay, so therefore, I guess I would see myself now as a critic of the implicit idea that local development is the beginning and the end of all development. And as I say, it's applied to Maori. And so I'm of the view that how do you balance the macro view with the micro view? How do you balance local community development with the need of global or national development? Issues like poverty and wealth creation are no longer constrained by national boundaries or cultural boundaries. Poverty in the world is clearly a global issue. All societies, by their very nature, I would argue, create poverty. And that's the great paradox of wealth creation. The more wealth you create, the more poverty you create at the same time. Some of you have been talking about that before. So that's why we need strategies that are double strategies. Create wealth for the well-being and the common good of all, and build another strategy to make sure you're removing poverty at the same time, rather than create wealth, then turn around and say, oops, we've got all this poverty. Poverty in New Zealand is a new phenomenon of our age, and particularly in Maori society. So the wealthier Maori are getting, we actually seem to be creating an awful lot of poverty within Maori society. And that's a picture, I think, of New Zealand. So this business of balancing both macro and local views, it's not an either or anymore in my book. It's how do we create in our communities, whether they are local or national communities or global communities, the attitude that local and global, local and macro, or macro and micro are actually two sides of the same coin. That's basically my proposition. What I found helpful, though, is to pick up some thinking that's in China, in particular the book by John and Dorothy Nesbitt, China Megatrends. Now, megatrends is one of the Nesbitt's ideas, and that's if you look at the political, social, cultural, social, and all the aspects of development, and you bring them all together in some sort of coherent way of thinking, and therefore you pick up this mega trend, right? So they've done it in China for the Chinese government, although they're just about to renew themselves hopefully this week. But I want to pass these metaphors because I wonder whether they are the kind of metaphors that also speak to New Zealand and the Pacific. They talk about, the first one is the emancipation of the mind. How do you free people's minds from being local and free them in such a way that they see themselves of a grander picture? And the one I particularly liked was the balancing top-down and bottoms-up. China is a very good example. Who sets the top-down agenda? And how do you then mobilize local communities to become social innovators, social entrepreneurs, as well as commercial innovators and commercial entrepreneurs? And how do you get that mix? I particularly like the other metaphor they use, framing the forest and letting the trees grow. All this is very Chinese, I find. And that is reframe the political questions, reframe the social questions, reframe the cultural questions, reframe the economic questions, and then let all the little trees grow. And there's something very liberating in these thoughts. Crossing the river, this is Deng's famous one, crossing the river by feeling for stones. In other words, we know the strategy, we want to get across to the other side of the river. How we get there, well, that's for the local community to work out. And sometimes in crossing the river, you will have to feel for stones. Some stones will be solid, some stones will be loose, and you want to backtrack. But the agenda is always to get to the other side. So crossing the river for feeling for stones. Artistic and intellectual ferment is another one of their mega trends in China. How do you encourage artistic creativity? And how do you encourage intellectual ferment? And again, you'll notice in this, it's two sides of the same coin. Creating the artistic, the aesthetic mindset of a people to see beauty in all that they do, as well as creating the intellectual ferment that's going to be the source of innovation and entrepreneurship. Freedom, joining the world. China is joining the world big time, and China's going to lead the world big time soon. Well, this is New Zealand's agenda also. Freedom and fairness, I won't touch on that, but it's there. Freedom, how do you encourage freedom at one level and ensure fairness right across society? And finally, from Olympic gold medals to Nobel Prizes. We are certainly in this space, we're hot on gold medals, but we seem to have no ambition to have Nobel Prize winners in our midst. So why not? Kia ora.